Well, okay. Welcome to Angelo. I'm so happy that you could make it. I'm so happy you could make it. For people, if you don't know who Angelo is, you need to check him out. He has an amazing homepage called Simply Always Awake. He also has a Facebook page and a YouTube page with the same name. And I came across Angelo. It feels like complete coincidence. I was just getting a recommendation on YouTube on Sea Dog, and I've never seen any video from Sea Dog at all. And I saw your interview, and I just was like, this is amazing. The way that you talk about your awakening and the way that you talk about how your experiences are, it's so down to earth. And it was so, for me, it was so recognizable. There are lot of other people that I don't really recognize myself in, but the way that you talked about it really, really did. And I like the way that you made it very, very available. So I bought the book that you have written right after the talk. This is my very bent model, and for everybody, can really, really recommend you to buy it. It's called Awake. It's your turn. And you're basically, what you're doing in this book, Angelo, you're taking people through the awakening process, and you do it so down to earth. There's nothing that you need to be a scholar of any kind. You can just pick up the book, read it, and have insights, and then follow it up by the huge amount of videos that you have on your channel. It's really, really impressive. Every time I get notifications that a new video has been released, I'm like, oh my goodness, again. It's like daily or something like that. You're making videos.
I've been doing them daily. Yeah.
It is amazing, amazing, amazing. And also the way that you talk about all these topics, and you're really good at also being very wide. You're not staying in one lane. You're very, very wide, and you have some amazing interviews with people that have just seen through self, just broken the first fetter, just seen through self, and it's really, really enjoyable. So if people are not following you already, I can warmly recommend you to follow Angelo.
Well, thank you so much.
And the reason that I would like to interview you is that the way that I work with awakening, it's through Buddhism. That's how I came into it, and I'm using the fetter model with the 10 fetters that are kind of like, the first one is about non-identification and non-self, seeing through self, and the rest of them are basically just tweaks on the kaleidoscope, where it's about doubt and ill will and aversion. So all the things that you go through when you are on the awakening path. But what is interesting is that people that have never ever done fetter work, when they have become awake and they look back, they can look back and see, oh, that was the second fetter, oh, that was the sixth fetter. And you're doing some really great interviews at the moment with Kevin, talking about the fetters, and I really enjoy those as well, because it's like two different angles reaching to the same point. So the idea today is that I am going to ask you a question from each fetter, and then you're going to relate the question into the experience that you had in your awakening.
Sure.
Okay, let's start. The first thing I would like to ask you is obviously to hear, just short, how your story was, how you came into all this.
Yeah. Well, what I often say, and I think it's essentially the underlying truth of the deal is, for me, the initial part of the path was suffering. It was a certain kind of suffering. It wasn't necessarily the narrative of I suffered because of this, this, and this. It was more like something about the way I was processing information, processing the experience of being alive in the body, in the mind, with thoughts, with emotions, felt intrinsically uncomfortable. It just felt dysphoric, not right. And because I grew up with that, like I just had it the whole time, it was strange in that there wasn't even a part of me that could step outside of that and go, it shouldn't be this way. Like, why is it this way? Why does it feel so heavy? So much struggle internally. And the older I got and the more, I guess, perceptive I got, I could see that it was also happening for a lot of other people, maybe everyone to some degree, but I was it was obvious that everyone wasn't as sensitive to it as I was. Like many people could clearly just go along with their life doing just fine and seemed actually pretty happy. And I never felt deeply at peace at all. It was just that. And the older I got, became fully aware, like maybe after puberty, it really like took a quantum leap in how uncomfortable it was. And maybe that was because I was now interfacing with other egos that were also suffering, but having various degrees of authenticity and inauthenticity about it, that who knows where they learned that from their parents. I was probably doing it as well. So there was just this like magnification of the discomfort. And it was really uncomfortable. And it became obvious to me that it was thought-based, or at least largely was something about thought, and it was miserable. And so that was my teen years. And I was interested in Eastern thought, Eastern religion, but I didn't really know why. There was something in it that I liked. There was something mystical about it, but I didn't know what it was specifically. I even learned about Buddhism. I even learned about Taoism. I remember reading the Tao Te Ching and just going, there's something here. There has to be something here, but it makes no sense. Like logically, this is opaque. It's like it's concrete. And yet there's like got to be something here, but it was very frustrating. That didn't get me very far. I learned about Buddhism. I learned about enlightenment. I learned about Buddha talking about enlightenment, but the context I learned it in was always something along the lines of, just, lifetime after lifetime and get merit and meditate. And, maybe I never got the sense of like, no, you can actually wake up right now. And what that means is the end of your personal suffering. That's what this addresses. I didn't make that connection really. So I had heard about Buddhism and all these sorts of things. It wasn't really until probably a few different tastes, but one was definitely in a class on Zen and Japanese culture in my undergrad college. Maybe I was 19-ish. And we had a guest lecturer one day, and he was a Buddhist monk, actually, I don't know what lineage he was from, but he was lecturing in a very specific way about Buddhism. And all of a sudden, it was really obvious to me he was talking about this possibility of waking up. I don't even know what terminology he was using, but it really hit me that he was not saying this is doctrine, this is historical stuff. He was saying, no, this can happen to you. Like, this is how you do this, And yeah. I was like, my hand went up and I said, I remember saying, like, this thing you're talking about, like, I didn't even care that anyone thought it was a strange question, because all of a sudden it was like that message was the only thing in the room for me. I was like, this thing that you're talking about, is that actually possible? And he stopped and he took a couple steps towards me. He leaned in, and I remember him just like pausing for a moment. He said, there is no doubt. Wow. And then I was like, whoa. And then he backed up and he just kept lecturing. And I was like, wow, that was something. And it was really like the environment changed, the atmosphere. I could feel it was very visceral. And something just opened, and it was like, okay, there's a possibility here. I don't know what it is yet or how to get it, but there's something that's addressing my personal suffering. That's what something in this Buddhism thing, or I didn't even know if it was Buddhism, but I knew it was possible. That was kind of like a seed that was planted, I think.
Yeah.
And then, a few things happened over the next few years and whatever, but I'll cut to the chase. So the gist of it was, I didn't become a devout Buddhist. I wasn't a practicing Buddhist, but I was meditating. I learned transcendental meditation from kind of like an old hippie who learned it back in the 60s from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And so
we've all met those, haven't we? We all met those, the old hippies with the TM. Yeah.
Oh, I was so grateful too, and it was really wonderful. The meditation was like water in the desert, because my life of thinking and thought and bound up into mind was so uncomfortable that was the only respite I would get. And occasionally I would get these little openings, but they were very fleeting. I didn't know what they were. I would just feel like flow for a half a day or something. So all I knew to do was meditate. I meditated a couple times a day, and it was really enjoyable when I was meditating most of the time, but otherwise just kind of suffering, and then like a few things happened all at the same time. There was like a breakup with a romantic connection, and very strangely, I picked up there were a couple books on my bookshelf I had never opened. One was called I think it was called 3 Golden Pearls on a String or something. And I randomly opened it to this one line that I could have read this line 100 times before that, and this would have never happened, but it happened this time. And I remember the line was, non-attachment doesn't mean non-feeling. It means non-attachment to feeling. And that was it. It was that simple. And I was like, oh my God, I know what that means. I could feel something shift inside. I was like, whoa, okay. And then I picked up this book called The 3 Pillars of Zen. And I had never opened it before. I'd had it for a few years. And I got to this chapter called Enlightenment Accounts of Westerners. So this were people who went through the Zen traditional practice, going to sesshins, which are the big Zen 7-day, retreats and so forth. But they literally wrote the narrative in their own words of what it was like to go through that shift. They called it Kensho. And I read every one. I was like, oh my God, that's where I'm going. I said, I'm going there. I don't care if it kills me. That's where I'm going. I knew it. Nothing else in my life mattered at all. And this was quick. This happened like within a couple of days of reading through this stuff. It was just like, whoa, everything was shifting around me. Everything was turning gray. It didn't matter. Like I knew where I was going, and I was going to find my way. And then it started to build like this, almost like a momentum. It's kind of hard to talk about, but it was an intuitive deepening that was just happening, all the time, actually. And I was just attuning myself to it. And there was some interesting instructions in that book. And one of them was they were using the koan mu. What is mu? Just a basic koan, but it's the most common first koan. And the Zen teacher the Roshi had told the students, do not separate yourself from mu, not even 1 millimeter. Think of it like a railroad track that goes on to infinity. Don't deviate from that track. And I did that. I was like there with it. It was so close. And there was just that singularity of focus, I suppose, to the point where the mind got very quiet during meditation. It got quieter than it ever had. And then sort of simultaneously, I started noticing thoughts, but I noticed the foundational thoughts, not the thoughts that were like daydream wandering thoughts, but like a thought that says, oh, I'm here right now. I am. That's a thought. Okay, well, if that's a thought, right? And then when it was like a layer of identity would just strip away, and things just got more vast and really hard to define. It wasn't even spacious per se, because it was not in space. It was just beyond the confines of identity. And what was beyond the confines of identity was very surprising, actually. And so that's what I did. And I just went, man, I just went there. I don't know how I went. I can't tell you how I did it exactly, but I could, break it down and so forth. But it was really a release. It was a complete letting go, because that was the only way I knew, because everything else I had done up to that point didn't work, didn't bring peace. So that was it. And so that night there was a very profound shift. The letting go until it just got extremely quiet is the best way I could say it. But it wasn't a space. It wasn't nothing. It was yeah. And it just got extremely quiet. And then something did shift. I don't know how to talk about what that was, but the quietude was not something in the background. It wasn't caused anymore. It was the primary experience. Yes. And it was kind of like this had always been the primary experience, but something was missing it. Something was overlooking it and leapfrogging past it, trying to find something to make me feel better. So it was just like, whoa, quiet. And it was like so peaceful. And I remember thinking, I will come back to this for the rest of my life, every moment I have, because what else would I do, right? It was that enjoyable. And I went to sleep, and it was just the deep, deep peace. Then the next day, I woke up, took a shower, sat down to meditate, and I was instantly there again, just that peace. Yeah. And then even that broke. Even the peace went away. And I can't really talk about what that's like, because there's no way to talk about that. But the whole identity structure, which actually turned out to be the whole world, like even reality itself went away, like it was deconstructed. So that was really wild. That was like going down the rabbit hole and then finding another rabbit hole and going down that rabbit hole. So, and this all happened very quickly for me. Then, there were experiences of like past lives, and it was really, really something. But also, I could see it was this way for everyone and everything, because there was no one and there's no things. And yet there's apparent beings walking around living in this internal world that I somehow just found my way out of. And so it was like, then the challenge is like, well, how do you live in this world now? Yeah. In one way it's very easy. In another way, it's like extremely challenging, very paradoxical. So I entered a world of paradox beyond description. So that's the best way I could say it. Is that a good summary?
Amazing. Yeah, amazing. I really think that your experience that you had of the one pointedness, in my experience, it's what quiets the mind in such a way that we actually get in. It's kind of like being zoomed into that stillness, and in there's just the quietness, and that's when it can start to expand on the other side. So it's not the meditation per se that does it. It's the quiet. It's the one pointedness, in my experience as well. Yeah. I completely get it. And when we get to the higher 5 of the fetters, I would love to talk to you about that complete paradoxical being in the world, which is just like complicated with time and all the other details. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's start with the first fetter. The first fetter is about identification and non-self. It's the seeing through self. It's like the basic entry point of understanding that the identification that we have and the one that we identify with is just thought, and the one thinking about the thoughts is a thinker too. So it's just thoughts. Everything is just thoughts. Beyond that, there's not a self anywhere. And my question to you is, how do you view the separate self and its role in life from your current perspective?
Yeah. So it actually, interestingly, I don't have to think about it at all. There's no thought about that really. I can, in fact, to reflect on the conventional self usually only comes up in conversation with other people. That's the best way I can say it. It's a way of speaking, and it does have a function there. It has a function for communication, exchanging information. But everything else is so intimate. It's so the sensory experience is just so intimate and absorbed that even connection, even like emotional connection with another human, really isn't at the intellectual level at all, or the verbal or communication level. It's very much like energetic for me. Everything happens so quickly and so spontaneously that there's no need to deny a conventional self whatsoever, but it usually, most of its functions in communication with other people.
Yeah.
The one thing I want to say about this is important is sometimes I think people get a taste of no self. They may even have that first realization, that stream entry in this way we're speaking. But there's so much resistance and reactivity left and emotional repression that it's like, oh, I don't want to do that part of it. I just want to remain in no self, whatever that means. So it becomes reified as almost like a mental thing, and you can use it as an avoidance pattern. So I would always caution not to do that. And that's not what I'm talking about, because when the illusion of self in all its aspects is fully sort of seen through, let's say, then there's actually no reason not to inhabit the conventional self. There's not resistance to it anymore. So I like things like improv. I like things like relational work and circling and emotion work. And I'm all about that kind of stuff. I love it because there's nothing there going, oh, there's no self to do this. Like it's just another appearance. Everything is just appearance. And it's really, and you can celebrate it. That's my answer.
Yeah. I love it. I completely agree. It's one of the things that I'm really emphasizing as well. The problem with identifying with non-identifying, that it can really become a thing not to identify and not to have a self. So you all of a sudden have a self in the not having a self. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
And I think it's a reaction to living a life of that, especially like the mind identified life of the thought-based self that lives in time, has a future, has a past, always struggles against everything, constantly doubts itself. It's such a relief when that settles down that you can almost overcompensate in the other direction and identify as this non-self. And it's just like you said, it's still an identity. The function of identity is still operating, but it's oh, I'm not here instead of I am here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And that then limits us from doing exactly what you're saying, having a normal conversation where we talk as if there's an agent, knowing that there's not, but we can just have a normal conversation and we can engage on different levels, and there's no attachment to not having or to having. It's just the way it is. Love it.
That's exactly it. Yeah. Very fluid.
Thank you. The second fetter is about doubt. And I put a lot of emphasis, I think of all the fetters that I put the most emphasis in when I'm teaching, it's about doubt, because doubt has hooks that goes so deep into low self-worth, into questioning decisions, the back and forth, and there's so much ego and then don't want to be ego, and doubt is a huge one. And the antidote that I'm using for doubt is calm. It's simply, you need to find calm. You need to to breathe and you calm down. And then things, because doubt is not, you cannot resolve doubt. You can only dissolve doubt. You need to, move back, back off and then just let it dissolve itself. So the question that we have about doubt in the second fetter is, which realization was in your experience tied into the dissolving of the illusion of self-worth?
Yeah, the illusion of self-worth.
Yes.
Yeah. I would say largely 90% of that was really that first shift that I talked about, where there was just that absolute neutrality. Because one of the biggest things I noticed about that was the lack of doubt. The blanket of doubt that was so heavy, where everything I did, I doubted myself, and I doubted it, just doubt. That was so heavy. But there was still some lingering doubt beyond that, and that takes some subtlety to root it out and see when it comes in. And a lot of that deeper, more insidious doubt is actually tied to belief, I think. So seeing that belief and doubt are really two sides of the same coin, the moment you feel really inclined that, oh, I'm sure this is true, there's probably some doubt hiding somewhere behind it, and it's just a matter of time before the worm turns, right? So seeing the relationship between doubt and belief can be really helpful as well. And just as you said, just learning to really get yourself back to that neutrality, to be calm. And there is a sort of passive dissolving of that over time.
Yeah.
But for me, the big hit, and as they say, with that, the first three fetters tend to fall together.
Yeah.
Largely that was true because there was such a weight lifted. And that's why I'd love to really, it's the thing I like to do the most. I like working in deeper stages of realization and all of it, but I really love that first shift for people, because people are so beaten up by their own doubt and they don't even see the depth of that. And in one sense, it's kind of a freebie, but it's a huge shift in experience.
Yeah.
And so, and just having that weight lifted is such a relief for people. Then they can start the real work. But so a lot of it is tied into that, I think.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
The third fetter is about harmful routines, and it's the way that I talk about it is all the things that we do where we have a purpose. You know, we do something, we exercise to lose weight, and we eat healthy to live longer, and we do a lot of things with a purpose, where there's so much identification going into that action, into that routine, and into doing that in a certain way. So and the antidote to that is presence. It's just really being aware, having that body yes, body no experience, to find out whether you're doing something cerebrally, you know, with really thinking it's a great idea, or if it's something that you can feel that you actually really have, you know, a need to do and not a want to do.
Yeah.
So the question is, how was your relationship with food, alcohol, exercise, consumerism, spiritual practices, addictions, and all that? How has that changed, and why did it change?
Yeah, so that really did with this shift I talked about. That tremendously dropped. There many sort of habits just dropped away. The impulse to drink alcohol, things like that, was diminished almost completely. I didn't have any really strong addictions that I can think of that were destructive before, but there were definitely habituated habits. And what I noticed is they were on a rotation. Like I could say, oh, maybe I'm drinking a little too much on the weekends. Okay. And I would do now I'm more addicted to this. And it was like one after the other, just pulling and pushing on you, and you're pulling and pushing on it. And yeah, underlying all of it is the sense of control, that I need to stay in control in some way, in some gross way. When that stopped, it was like, oh, that's also a relief. You realize really it's not really like you think it is. It's not so much like that. And as you said, actually very well said, presence is the key, because the closer you look at the moment, like people sometimes ask, how do you dissolve the sense of agency? And it's like, well, you don't really need to dissolve it. Just look at what's actually happening in the moment. And then all of it just becomes kind of obvious. Like there's just, you know, like this is what's happening. And then out of that presence, naturally arising from that presence, it's amazing. Let's just call it intelligence of what you actually need to be doing. Like everything just realigns so naturally. So this area specifically is really an act of surrender to what you're hooked up to think of in terms of God, or maybe you're in terms of the universe or the Dharma or unbinding of identity, whatever it is, or maybe nothing, maybe you don't even know what, but it's sort of surrendering to this presence that really realigns everything. And that goes deep, deep, deep. And it just keeps going until that's all that's left. Actually, it's a beautiful thing. So I was in
in a supermarket today, and walking around at all the aisles and looking at all the things that are there, and it's like what do you call it, the superfluous of all of it that is there, and what it's actually representing is it's mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing, to walk around in that and look at it with that not need, you know, to divert, you know, to divert emotions or divert attentions or divert thoughts or divert anything, but just purely being there, you know, picking up a cucumber and that's it. It's really, really a huge one when this one falls. Really, really is. And you're completely right in that it just takes on its own life in dissolving. Yeah, love that. Thank you. The fourth fetter is about desire, and that's all the things that we want, and it's kind of tied into the fifth fetter, which is ill will, all the things we don't want. But I'm trying to separate the two to become, you know, for people to become more clear on that pull that we can have towards something and the push that we can have towards something. And the antidote to both ill will and desire, it's contentment. It's the finding out when you have that feeling of push-pull in you, finding out what are you actually content with, and stay in that gap of that sticky thing that you want to do something, either push it away or pull it, and just be with the contentment and breathe into that contentment that you have in that space. So the question for the fourth fetter is, what used to be your biggest ambition that no longer holds any importance?
Oh, that's like a good one. Okay. Yeah. Let me sit with that a minute. It's been a while since I had ambitions like that. Oh, okay. Well, for sure it was this. It was to find a perfect romantic partner.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wasn't completely clear that that's what it was all the time, but it would weave itself in and out of my life. And I remember very distinctly when that dropped, actually. And I'll get back to that in a second, but I love how you pulled the fourth and fifth apart, because what I find is that I like the order they're in, actually, because what I actually find is the primary issue is an aversion to life. It's a sort of fear, the holding back from, you know, whoa, because when you stop doing that, it's just complete absorption. So there's that holding back. And with that, there's fear and some other things. And then desire is a way of actually running from fear, is running from emotions we don't want to feel a lot of times. So I think looking at it in terms of when you feel like you're grasping towards something, or, you know, you just feel so distracted by that want or desire, just pause for a moment and just say, what am I really feeling here? Am I avoiding something? And you'll start to feel the emotions often. And that can be really helpful. So that leads into what really clicked for me about this. This took a long time for me, but I got through the actual external reactivity of it earlier, you know, that I could see the pushing and pulling with romance and so forth, and I wouldn't act out on it in a necessarily unhealthy way. I probably did earlier in life, but I wouldn't anymore. But I could still feel it there. There was still like the belief was somehow, you know, even though I know it was absurd that someone else is going to make me happy, I had evidence to the contrary, and I was generally happy. Yet there was still like the thread of that seeking in there. And I didn't know what it was. But I remember the moment it hit me. I was like sitting in a hotel room, just, I don't even know why. I wasn't in despair or anything, but it clicked, and it was so obvious, and I hadn't seen it this way. What I thought I always wanted was that perfect partner or that perfect person or whatever. But what I actually want, that's not what I wanted. I thought that's what I wanted. What I really wanted was to be free of the fear of not having it. The moment I saw that, it was like, it just collapsed, and I never felt it again. Yeah. And so then after that, I could be, you know, emotionally close, connected to someone in a relationship or out of a relationship. And they have different textures for sure. And they have, you know, pluses and minuses and stuff, but there was no finger on the scale anymore. I was okay either way completely. And I didn't realize it really doesn't matter either way. So that would probably be the biggest one for me.
Yeah, love it. It's really, you said the word about seeking that, and I think that's it's a great way to use, because normally when we talk about seeking, we talk about, you know, spiritual seeking, but seeking for a partner or seeking for somebody to fulfill us, or to lean up upon, or to whatever, speak with or confide in, or whatever we're seeking for, it's the same like quicksilver energy, you know, that completely, which is never ever going to calm down, because it's not in its nature. Yeah, I really love that. And then realizing that it wasn't the partner, it was the not feeling that you, love it. Love that. Really good. Thank you. Sure. It's funny because what you talk about with romantic relationships and partner and all of that, it's one of the things that changed the most in my experience. Well, obviously all of it changed a lot, but there's something like in that foundation of being content. There's not that urge or grasping anymore. It's and whenever I speak with people about it, it's the same all over you know, that everybody is experiencing that. It has just changed. That feeling tone has just changed. So I'm really happy you talked about that. Thank you.
Yeah, and the beautiful side effect is when you're in a either, well, I'll say romantically connected relationship, or just when you're emotionally connected to anyone and that last bit of fear isn't there, then you can really finally see them. You really don't want anything from them anymore. You may enjoy their company for sure, but that's unconditional love when you can see what they actually need. And sometimes, you know, they can become dependent on you, and you can sort of work with that a little bit or whatever, and you can just navigate that in a more loving way for sure. Is what I found.
Yeah. We're getting to the ninth fetter shortly. That is about that flow feeling. And the way that I feel with my relationships is that I have more a flow being with people, that no matter what we're doing, I'm completely fine. You know, I have no hooked up that it needs to be cozy and all of that. You know, it's just like just being is completely fine. And whichever way, you know, sitting and waiting in an A&E or whatever we're doing, and waiting for the train or whatever we're doing, completely fine, because it's not tied into anything anymore. It's just that being with one another, sharing space with one another, and that's completely enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, love it. Then there's the opposite, which is the fifth fetter, ill will. All the things we do not want: anger, aggression, annoyance, all of that. And the question is, if you still experience the primary sensation, even after the fetter of ill will has fallen, what is the difference between the mechanism of reactivity then and now?
So yeah, there can be, when you stop, from what I've seen, and in my experience, it's played out in phases, I would say. But when you stop overtly reacting, that doesn't mean that an uncomfortable feeling might still be there. So, and this is important. I think this is key, and I'm not sure it's always completely obvious, but when the reactivity stops, it's actually quite obvious, the difference. That's the thing, is all these reactions are stuck together so quickly, we don't realize that the event, the sensation, the emotion, the feeling, the judgment for the feeling, and then the reaction are all the same thing, but they're not. So we can actually feel something that feels uncomfortable in a situation, and we might even have the intuition that there's still some interpretation going on our end that may be underlying that, and yet we have no need to react anymore. We can just be okay with the fact that this is what's happening, and it's fine. So I would say that to pay attention to the stages of that as they form into a reaction, and some mark of reaction is like, you know, like overt anger, like really losing it, you know, thinking back on going, that wasn't me. How did I get so upset in that situation? Like things like that are reactions. Whereas you can be around, say at work or something, someone who's not the most easy person to be around, and it can be you can be physically uncomfortable around that person and still not react. You don't have to, you know, act out of unkindness or in a way that's almost like retaliatory or any of that. That doesn't have to happen at all. You can just feel it, realize this is the situation. The situation will change, as it always does, and so forth. And then over time, and this is more like ninth fetter, I think, in this model, then even that sense of like looking really closely and going, well, what is it in here that even thinks it should be different or could be different at all?
Yeah.
Could it even ever actually be different? And then there's something about
Does it need to be different, or is it absolutely
yeah,
fine as it is? Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. And so, but the thing about that, the key to that is with any self-structure left, that's almost impossible because
Yeah.
the self is always trying to find a position in relation to experience. That's it. That's what it does. Yeah. So
Selfing is like massive, and
yeah.
especially when it's about ill will and aggravation and annoyance and all of that. And I love what you say with, slowing down, slowing down. So you kind of like see it, frame for frame, so you can catch yourself before the selfing, enters the arena, and you can actually be with it without reacting, and also remembering that just because you have a thought does not mean that you need to act on it. It's just a thought. Just like a smell is a smell and a sound is a sound. It's not more important than anything else. It's just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah. And the only other thing I would add about this to anyone watching is talking in the way we're talking through the stages and fetters and all this can sound overly complex. Now, if you're going through it and working through fetters, great, you probably get it. But if it sounds overly complex, I just want to point one thing out, and that is what we just touched on, that really, if I want to simplify this whole thing, it's really about clear seeing. It's really about a willingness to actually see what's going on inside you. That's the key. Where am I reacting? What's the emotion? Do I have a resistance pattern around that emotion? What are my thoughts that what could happen if, okay, that's a thought, and then back down here to the sensation. And the more you just look closer and closer and closer, this stuff tends to naturally deconstruct itself.
Yes.
These pointers can be helpful because it gets subtle, but just so anyone knows,
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. The most important thing is to see through self, that there's no separate self, and for the rest of them, just be curious. That's it. Night. And then we could just stop it there, because it's absolutely true. Absolutely true. It's only for to have kind of like how can I say, a box to look into and to dive into, and it's not one of the things that I think is really important about the fetter work as well is that it's not linear. We like to present it as the first and the second and third, but it's not how it is. It is all over the map. Like we just talked about, with the fourth and the fifth and the ninth, and it's all weaved in together. So
I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, then it's the sixth fetter. And the sixth fetter is about the subject object, the way that we perceive the world, where there's an I and there's that. When we look at something, there's that darting out and pulling in what we're looking at, and then we add an opinion on top of that. So it's that separation of the world with all the objects, and then the subject here, where the antidote that I use for it is observing. Is really observing everything, observing in what is happening in here, observing what is out there, observing where the distance is, and if there's a distance, and how you actually see it. So it's not about recognizing that is a cup. It's about really, really seeing, question everything. Is this a cup? Are you sure this is a cup? Or if you put a flower into it, then it's a vase. It's that really, really observing what is. And the question that I have is, how do you feel the changes in visual perception relate to feelings of interconnectedness and loss of subjectivity?
Yeah. So for me, it kind of happened in it seemed to happen in two chunks, but I remember very distinctly, this was within a few days before those big shifts I was talking about. I got a very, very, very clear taste of this. It was very obvious. And the situation was very simple. I was working as a manager in a pizza store, and I had a guy working with me who was developmentally delayed. He had cerebral palsy, and so he was nonverbal, but he was, he did a great job. He'd wash dishes and did some other things, but he was always in a good mood, always a happy guy, super sweet guy. He could sign a little bit with his hands, but he had contractions, so he couldn't sign a lot. But he had a simple vocabulary, did great, loved life, happiest guy in the world. And I remember one moment I was feeling this deep suffering in myself of like my problems and my stuff. And I looked over across the room at him, and it started with a thought. And the thought was, well, he looks completely happy and he doesn't have all the problems I have. And it turned from a thought to like, oh my God, I was like there and here at the same time. And everything in the room had the same equivalent value. And I was like, whoa, I have never felt that before, but it was so obviously more real than the way my mind had been perceiving it ever since I could remember. I was like, oh, it was an absolute neutrality, but not a mental neutrality. It was like, oh, that's just as much me as I'm me, as that's me, as that's me. It was like kind of me everywhere in one sense, but there was no, it made me not special, but I also simultaneously realized how much of a curse it was to try to be special. You
Yes.
don't want to be special. You think you want to be special, but it's like when you taste it like that, it's like, oh my gosh. And it was like a feeling of love immediately. It was a different depth of love. And oh man, and that kind of lasted for a while. And then after these shifts, it was obvious that it was just like that. So the biggest aspect to me was not as much the visual experience of it, because once the formlessness was obvious, that was a whole different thing. But it was the sense that there was no center, and there's no need to reify a center or enforce a center or come back to a center. It was that was a really big relief, bigger one than I would have ever imagined beforehand. And I
Yeah.
never read about it or heard about it or anything. It just happened. So that was how it was for me. I thought it was really cool.
Amazing. I completely lost my breath when you said it. It was like I was being there, just experiencing.
Mhm.
I completely lost my breath. That was
Mhm.
amazing. Amazing.
Mhm.
But it is like that. It is like that and some shifts happen like that, where it's just like, flick of a finger, and then it's just you just see it. You just
Mhm.
realize
Mhm.
what the entire delusion is all about. I love that. I love that,
Yeah.
Angela. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Really good answer. Thank you.
Mhm.
Then it's the seventh, and the seventh is it's form and formlessness, and the way that I normally talk about it is, all the things that is nothing that we create into something. All the things that it could be things about the past, and it could be so many different things that are absolute thoughts that we do, and then we create a problem which wasn't there before we created something out of nothing. And the question, so it's about seeing the illusion, obviously. And the question is, which was the most effective technique in dropping this fetter? And how would you describe the shift you had when it fell?
So the technique for me, to be honest, this was that second part, the next morning thing that I described. And the technique was just a deepening of surrender. And this one, it's very hard for me to say I did anything. This came upon me, and the shift was so fundamental and profound. And it wasn't about me. The first shift felt like it was about me. This felt like it was about the physical structure of reality. And it was just not what I thought it was. It has no, I can just describe, it never changed. It never went back because it can't. It has no solidity. It has no specific location. So locationality, the one before that sixth fetter is more about relationality. I'd say, like that everything's in relation, and I'm the center of all relationships, and that's always being managed and navigated. When that stops, you have a clear opportunity for this next part, which is to see, like, is there anything at all? Is there actually a world or anyone in it or anything? And that also, when that falls, even the idea that there's something called no world, that falls too.
Yeah.
There's not no world either. It's just there's no way that things are that's definable. And it's just this freedom. It's like a physical freedom in the fabric of experience, let's call it. I don't even know. This is where words really, really start to fail for
Yes.
me.
Yes.
But I remember driving to work going, how in the world am I driving a car right now? Like, there was still the conventional knowing there's a body in a car and there's trees, but I remember the trees and the car and the body were completely interpenetrated. It was even other times and places were kind of like intermixed with it. And boy, it was just freedom, 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 freedom. It was like a deep freedom feeling, and still is. Still
Exactly.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because like you say, when that unfolds, it's like there's no coming back. You cannot enter that one again.
Yeah.
It's not something which you can't, be a little bit pregnant. It's not a little bit the seventh falling. It's like, either it is or it isn't. It's so
Yeah.
massive. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And also, this can sound so psychedelic, but to someone who maybe hasn't had the
Go
shift
on.
yet or whatever, but it's also completely natural,
Yes.
paradoxical. It's so
Yes.
natural. It's
Yeah.
so simply, obviously, right in front of your face. We're all seeing it all the time. It's just that somehow the mind is overlaying something onto it that looks
Yes.
like time, space, solidity, causality. It's just not there.
Completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, space, form, dimension, completely. And it seems so real, and yeah, and yet,
Yeah.
and it's such a freedom. It's
Yeah.
such a freedom. It's
It is.
when you get that, constant goofy smiling face on your thing on your face, that you just can't. Yeah.
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 And that was for me, although I don't even know if it was a formed thought at the point, but that was for me where it was like, okay, now it was like all of the suffering before it made sense. Even that was just perfectly orchestrated part of this whole thing. It was a deep gratitude and a feeling of like home, but it's not a place. It's not a center, not a place, not even a structured way of being, but it also felt like clearly home. So
Yeah. Beautiful.
yeah.
Beautiful. Thank
Mhm.
you. I
Yeah.
love that answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Then there's the eighth fetter, and the eighth fetter is the way that I see it is paired with the first one. So where the first one is about the identification and the separate self, that is like the chisel, the hammer and the chisel. In the eighth fetter is the I am conceit. So it's more like the sandpaper part, because until then you have had the feeling that there's a center of a someone, something, I, something. And with that, when that falls, it's also when when you're leaning up against a god or the universe or angels or anything like that, something, someone having your back, that you really realize, well, there's no one that anyone can have the back to. So it's like that completely dissolves. And it's one of the reasons I don't normally talk about about beyond the seventh fetter. It's because this one can be super, super scary when you haven't seen through self. And us sitting and talking about there is no God, it might, people might hear that in a different way than it's actually, well,
Yeah.
not that than it's actually meant, but what we would like for them to feel when we say it.
Yeah.
Let me say it like that. So the eighth fetter is about the I am conceit, and the antidote is understanding. It's where it's really, really, you have such a profound understanding of all of it, that it's not even, this is where we start to not be able, we just do the last part of this interview telepathically, I think, because it's much easier than words. Anyways, the question is, did you identify with I am awareness, I am consciousness, the self, and so on? And did you find it destabilizing or uncomfortable to let that identification go as well?
A great question. So first I want to say a little bit about what you mentioned about this, and because so in one sense you could say this is absolutely my favorite topic, I guess, in spirituality. It is where the rubber meets the road. It's what it all points to, though some of us would really not want to see that, yet that's all based on delusion. So it's perfectly okay. It's also perfectly natural. With that said, I'm very careful how I talk about it, because it can I really freak people out, even casually talking about it, not realizing that they didn't know what they meant when they were talking about no self. So I'm cautious, and I really just be careful the context and even how frequently I talk about it, because it's uncommon but I do see people cross over in this, and it's really a trip. It's also really fascinating how divergent people's experience of this not the first, but this final shift for the spiritual seeker is, because this is the end of the spiritual seeker in one very real way.
Absolutely is.
And it's interesting. Everyone over time comes to this place where what I feel from them is just this love. It's an uncaused love. It's a deep joy. But the transition to that, even after it falls, can be rocky for some people. And I think having a lot of trauma can make it more difficult. Misunderstanding of what it was beforehand, maybe, because I think maybe having a long life of being a Buddhist could be helpful. Although I've seen people who had that still have trouble with this. So, but they do adjust, and that's ninth fetter stuff essentially. But it's a fascinating thing. For me, it was the simplest way to say it is, once that seventh fetter falls, or once the formlessness is very obviously simply how it is, or how it's not, Once it's like that, it's like, well, there's nowhere for anything to hide, anything, any identity, any God, any self, any other. And it's just, there's nowhere for it to hide. So it's really a matter of time. Now, can you go chasing after it? Maybe in some subtle way. And we'll see what Kevin and I talk about next week. But for me, it was like the clock was ticking, and I don't even remember how long. It was within a month. And I was just like working, and all of a sudden it just hit like that. And I was like, I started laughing. I thought it was actually, it was really funny, because it was like, well, no shit, but also like, what was that even before? So I didn't even notice how much it was there until it was gone, in a way. But it was, I might even call it, like, I don't even know if I would have called it an I am sense, because I didn't know that terminology then. I didn't know spiritual terminology really, but it felt, what I could say is it feels like some substance and experience that's trying to solidify experience. Very, very porous, very easy to overlook. You could totally miss it probably for the rest of your life. But when it blinks out, it's like, boom, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So it's hard to talk about it.
Yeah,
But
it
it's
is.
also,
It is.
it's where this goes.
But it's also the reason why I like to ask this question is that when I speak with people, as you say, I also try to avoid this topic. I'm kind of like, avoiding talking about everything else but this topic, because people have so much, they're relying so much on that, bigger than, and they can't imagine it not being destabilizing, not having that.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's why I wanted. I'm really happy that you picked this question for me to ask, because there's nothing to be destabilized, and
Right.
and there's no feeling of destabilizing. It's like it's not even there. The word doesn't even exist. You can't create anything into that where that feeling would fit. So it's like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
It is, and it's very strange, because I've walked through this with people recently, actually, with one person in particular, where like there like for a moment it was like, well, there's just so much despair here, and it's like, okay, but can you find where that refers back to? And then it's kind of like, nope. Then they're fine. Like,
Sorted.
it's such a funny, it's very binary in a way. You definitely adjust, and it's clearly the most natural truth, and no one whom this occurs to doesn't immediately know that it's true, that it's just how it is. There's not anything like that. That's self-structure, or that whatever it is that collates experience and tries to turn it into something. It's just never been there.
Yeah.
Couldn't be there.
Yeah. Love it. Thank you. I'm really happy we talked about that.
Yeah.
The ninth fetter, it's called restlessness. And I usually call this the flow fetter, or the synchronicity fetter, because it's where there's no longer any restlessness in doing things. It's where all the planning just ends. You no longer plan to do anything, because you know that when you are in the moment and you're with whatever is alive, whatever you plan goes out the window anyway. So there's no planning anymore, and it's just like laundry is happening, and shopping is happening, and talking with you is happening, and it's just happening, where there's no direction in it at all, and there's no beginning or end on anything. It's just that flowing, where you can feel when you enter something, you have like, no, don't want to do that, okay, and then you just flow like a jellyfish in another direction. So I call it like the flow fetter, because that's when all the hooks into a fixed thing is kind of dissolved. Just like you and I had talked about doing this interview, and we had an idea of what we wanted to do, and this morning something else was alive, and then this came to be.
Yeah,
that's
great.
a very good example of the ninth fetter. And the question is, how has your experience of synchronicity changed?
Oh my goodness, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Go on.
Again, very difficult to talk about all this in words, in the language we have. It's only synchronicity now. There's nothing else. It's like, sometimes I say to people things like, don't hang on anything I say ever, because it's all about a certain synchronicity, and only you really know that synchronicity for yourself. So it's learning to trust your own synchronicity, your own frequency, whatever it is, Now, it can be challenging at first when we're mind identified, because the mind will quickly turn that into something, right? It'll turn into something for me or a self or control, or, but once you get past that layer of identity, you start to really drop into presence. You start to feel it, and it seems to kind of come and go. But after the self is gone, you see it's only this sort of very strange mystical synchronicity that has no need to be any certain way, and yet there's such an amazing like cadence to reality. It's just coming into being, going out of being so magically, but it works so well. It works so well, but it requires absolute surrender and surrender of
Yes.
self. And with that, there is that flow. There is that flow, and the hesitation really drops out. And even like I said, right after that shift, you may have a lot of intensity, hesitation, and that's the energetic restlessness maybe. But the beauty of it is there's no self anymore to solidify a position against it anymore. So it's so, in one sense, it's so uncomfortable that it just corrects itself very quickly, hopefully, and it's a strange thing to go through, and there's not really a lot of advice you can give someone, but it does correct itself. And where it corrects itself to is exactly what we're talking about, that there's no way to move against reality. There's no way to move against this flow of appearances or whatever this is, because this is all there is. There's no self apart from it. There's no anything apart from anything. There's no where that could happen. And then there's also clearly no self. So it's just this, it's, and there's this magical, wonderful synchronicity to it that you intuit, but there's nothing you need to make out of that either. It's not like you need to codify that or write about it even, or put it into a doctrine at all. Sometimes I'll say, like, I could say the same something to someone in one moment, and that could be, if based on the reflection of what's going on with them, and it might cause a sort of shift in their experience. But if I said the same thing 10 minutes later, it would be completely inappropriate. It would not even be the right thing. It wouldn't even be the right reality, because it's like reality is recombining itself all the time. The deck of cards shuffles itself constantly. It's just shuffling itself all the time. It's so mysterious.
It is, and it's so important to really realize that it's there all along. It's there all the time. That flow is there all the time. We're just the ones, swimming upstream. With it, we could just, flow with it, and there is nothing but that. There is nothing but that. So yeah, love it. Love it. Yeah, love it. Thank you very much. Last question. That's the 10th fetter, and I love talking about the 10th fetter, especially with people that are just going through the 4th and the 5th with ill will and desire, because the 10th fetter is about ignorance. It's about realizing that you will always be ignorant. The everything you work for with all the fetters, when you start out, and all the seek and all that, is to become wise. And what you realize in the 10th fetter is that it's never gonna happen. You will always be ignorant. You will always have the not knowing. You can never ever know everything, and there's so many things that you're not even supposed to know, and even if you tried to know it, you would never ever know it. So it's really that the more you know you don't know. And in that lies a lot of wisdom, and it's just that completely relinquishing into what is, and letting go of all things that you want to understand. I mean, I have always been very cerebral, and also with autism, I'm very much, I like small boxes, and I like, things linear, and I see patterns everywhere, and this one realizing that that is so ignorant. Oh, so ignorant, to believing that things are actually understandable. My question to you is, now that you know that you're never done and always will be ignorant, how is that compared to how you thought it would be? So I just called you ignorant. I hope you're fine with that.
I'm fine with that. It's the mystery itself is the greatest gift, but I would have never been able to see that through the lens of a self that wants to control, wants to understand, wants to know, wants to always find a position. It's wonderful. and it'll last just as long as it lasts, and it's fine. The relinquishment of all of that struggle, the relinquishment of all of that illusion of control, and the one that thinks it needs to control, the relinquishment of it, however that happens, and a lot of it will be because of your own discernment and stuff, and a lot of it will be because you failed at discerning, whatever, is a gift. It's the biggest gift you could ever have. And I feel it makes me feel gratitude. It feels like gratitude and love, but it's not contingent upon anything.
Yeah. I also think one of the big ones in this one is that or what it gave me is that complete and utterly acceptance of whatever is. That one of the things that I say the most is, who am I to know? That if I see somebody struggling and I really, really want to help them, they're really, really suffering, and I do everything that I can, and yet there's still that kind of little bit enjoyment in suffering, then I need to let go. I need to really understand that who am I to know what they need to achieve their freedom. I mean, if I look at my path, with cancer and brain injury, and there we go, all of it. I mean, it's not like you would go like, yay, that's the path I want. But now I would, because my goodness, I achieved this. So who am I to know what path people need to achieve their freedom? Yeah. And I think this fetter about ignorance, realizing that I am ignorant, I will never ever know what could be better than what actually is, which means that what is the best. It cannot be anything but absolutely amazing like it is. I have no preferences to what, and then I was asked, but you must have preferences towards something. Actually, no, warm bath or root canal, it's the same thing, isn't it? Because it's happening. If I'm having a root canal, I'm having a root canal. If I'm having warm bath, that's then what's what happening. Is. So there's no, and again, who am I to know that one thing is better than the other? That is so ignorant to believe that we know that one thing is preferred over the other. It's so ignorant. So it's like my favorite topic. I much rather talk about this than the 8.
And thought of something else as you were saying that. I can't remember now.
Fine.
So beautiful. We don't need to know.
No, exactly. That was it. That was my 10 questions.
That was it.
That was it. I'm so happy that you wanted to do that. Do you have anything like last minute you want to say to people that are watching before?
Okay. This is the last thing I want to say. It's I remember what I was going to say. So what also hit me with this part of things, I don't know if I could say it's 10 fetter specifically, but probably something like that, is what surprised me was when enlightenment and non-enlightenment became indiscernible. Because suffering, the whole like samsara is nirvana thing became really clear. Yes. It doesn't logically make any sense, of course. And I wouldn't wish suffering on anyone. And yet when someone's suffering and they're ready to open up, I'm like, that's music to my ears. I'm like, yes. Now, when someone's suffering a lot and they're closed to it and they have so much self-hatred, they're just internal and they can't, even that's probably okay. It's okay in its own way. But I mean, I do feel for them, but man, suffering is such a blessing. And yet it was the most miserable thing in this relative life. But boy, I wouldn't trade that for anything. It was perfectly orchestrated in a way I would have never imagined if given the choice, the choiceless choice. So, what I would say to anyone, if you feel suffering, if anything we're saying makes sense in some way or resonates, even if you don't fully get it, don't worry about it. Just take one step at a time. Just look a little bit closer. Just be willing to let this unbinding occur and really start to trust your own instincts to look deeper and let that take you beyond your thoughts. Let it take you beyond even your emotion. And this is available to anyone.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
I really do. Yeah.
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 It's also about the part with every situation is useful. It's just about how you look at it. So whichever situation you're in, you can always be curious, how is this situation useful? And if you can't see it, then you're blinding yourself. You're looking in the wrong direction. Look in another direction. Take a step back, look up from above instead of being fixated on this being a bad situation. Look into how is this actually useful? How can this actually develop the parts of me that needs to be developed? What is it that I can use my curiosity and actually open up to? So yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Great.
Cool. That was wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm super
Thank you.
grateful.
Yeah.
Super grateful. Really
I'm grateful.
enjoyable.
Yeah. Thank you.
Really enjoyable. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Bye.